The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, light and shadows. Part 1. A slow beginning. In a simple yet cozy home nestled among the vast forests of Quebec, Madeleine Leclerc was preparing breakfast. Every year, as spring began to unfurl its first signs of life, she found herself filled with bittersweet memories. Her son, Marc, had married Emma, a woman from Montreal. That day, Madeleine had been worried not just about the distance between them, but about the delicate dynamics of family relationships that had often been difficult for her to navigate. Madeleine was a strong woman, her hands rough and calloused from years of working the land. But when it came to Emma, her daughter-in-law, she felt a strange unease, a subtle discomfort that hovered in every conversation between them. Emma, with her city grace and modern sensibilities, was very different from anything Madeleine knew. She was a woman from the city, accustomed to a fast-paced, sophisticated world, far removed from the quiet rural life that Madeleine had known for so long. The first time they had met, Madeleine immediately sensed the differences between them, not just in the way they spoke, but in the way they saw the world. Emma was polite, but there was always a distance, an invisible wall between them, as though Madeleine was an outsider in her own son's home. Their relationship had never been warm. Every time Madeleine visited, she felt like a guest, a third party in her own family. It wasn't that Emma was unkind, but there was always something unspoken, a tension that filled the air whenever they were together. Part 2. A relationship full of tension. That particular morning, when Madeleine arrived at her son's house, the atmosphere felt different. Emma was sitting in the living room, her face weary and troubled. When Madeleine stepped inside, Emma looked up, but there was no smile, no warmth, just a slight weariness in her eyes. "Good morning, Mother," Emma said, her voice hoarse, as though she had been holding back something all night. "Good morning, dear," Madeleine replied, her gaze drifting over the dining table where remnants of breakfast had been hastily left behind. The silence between them was palpable, an unspoken acknowledgement that something was amiss. After a few moments, Madeleine spoke, trying to break the ice. "Where's Marc? Isn't he off today?" Emma's expression shifted slightly, but she answered, her tone distant. "He had an unexpected meeting at work. He couldn't get away." Madeleine nodded, but something in Emma's response felt off. It wasn't just the absence of her son that made her uncomfortable. It was Emma's subtle avoidance of the topic, as if the situation was being carefully sidestepped. "Emma, are you okay?" Madeleine asked, concern rising in her chest. She hadn't missed the look of stress in her daughter-in-law's eyes. Emma met her gaze, then, after a moment of hesitation, shook her head. "I don't know, Mother. I don't know what's going on anymore. Marc's been distant. I try to talk to him, but it's like he's pulling away, and I don't know why." Madeleine sat down, letting the weight of Emma's words settle. It had been a long time since she had seen such vulnerability in the younger woman's eyes. She could see that Emma wasn't just struggling with her marriage, she was struggling with a sense of isolation. "My son is stubborn, but he's also sensitive," Madeleine said after a long pause. "Sometimes he hides his feelings instead of facing them. Maybe you should talk to him directly, try to understand what's going on inside his mind." Emma looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I've tried, but he keeps shutting me out. I don't know how much longer I can keep trying." The sadness in Emma's voice was a sharp reminder of Madeleine's own past, a past filled with unspoken struggles and quiet heartaches. She knew too well the toll of an unspoken conflict, and for a moment, a deep sense of empathy stirred in her. But at the same time, Madeleine knew that the heart of the issue wasn't just Marc. It was the friction between their two worlds, the rural and the urban, the old and the new. It was a tension that neither of them had fully acknowledged, but was undeniably there. Part 3. The struggle for connection. In the days that followed, Madeline began to realize that the issues between Mark and Emma weren't just about their marriage. It was a deeper divide, one that reflected a generational gap and a clash of values. Emma, with her modern dreams and city upbringing, had a vision for her family that was far different from what Madeline had known. And yet, both women found themselves caught in the middle of a complex family dynamic, struggling to navigate a world that seemed increasingly foreign to both of them. Madeline's own relationship with Mark had been difficult at times. She had raised him in a world of hard work, sacrifice, and traditional values, and she couldn't help but wonder if those values were what kept him from opening up to Emma. But she couldn't deny that Emma, with her youthful optimism and drive for independence, was a woman who could bring something new to their family. The real question was whether they could find a way to meet in the middle, to bridge the gap that stood between them. And could Madeline, as a mother, step back and let her son fight his own battles in his marriage, even as she tried to maintain some semblance of peace in her own home? Part 4. Unspoken Struggles. The days after that conversation between Madeline and Emma felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, but no one knew exactly when it would break. Emma tried to stay busy, throwing herself into her work, while Madeline, ever the observer, kept a watchful eye on her son. She could see the subtle changes in Mark, his moods darker, his temper more unpredictable. He'd always been a quiet man, but now there was an edge to him, a distance that was harder to ignore. One evening, a few days later, Mark came by to visit his mother. He arrived at her doorstep late, his face tired, but still carrying the stubborn determination that had defined him for years. "Mom, can we talk?" Mark's voice was calm, but there was a tension in his posture, his shoulders stiff as though carrying some weight he didn't want to share. Madeline gestured for him to sit. "Of course, son. What's going on?" Mark sat down heavily, his gaze focused on the floor. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "It's Emma. I don't know what to do anymore." Madeline's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "You know, Mark, I've seen the way things have been between you two. It's been tense, hasn't it?" Mark nodded, his jaw clenching. "I don't want to talk about it, Mom. I don't want to admit how bad things have gotten. I thought we were fine, but now, I don't know. It's like we're living in two different worlds." Madeline's mind raced. She knew this moment was coming, knew it was inevitable, but hearing the raw pain in her son's voice made it hit harder than she expected. "I think you need to talk to Emma. Really talk to her," Madeline said, her voice soft but firm. "She's hurting too, you know. And sometimes you need to listen instead of trying to fix everything." Mark looked up, a shadow of guilt passing through his eyes. "I've been avoiding it. I didn't want to hurt her, but I don't know how to fix this. Every time I try to talk, it feels like we're just arguing. I don't want to lose her, Mom." Madeline paused, watching her son carefully. It was clear to her now that Mark didn't just need advice, he needed a wake-up call. His avoidance was driving a wedge deeper between them. "Mark, you have to stop running away from the difficult conversations," she said gently. "You need to understand that it's not about winning or losing. It's about being there for each other. Sometimes, the silence between you can be louder than any argument." Mark's face softened. "I know, but I don't know if she's willing to try anymore." Madeline reached over and placed a hand on his. "If you love her, you'll fight for her. You both will have to. That's the only way." Underscore 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 underscore. Part 5. A Fractured Peace. The next few weeks were a test of patience for both Emma and Mark. Their attempts to communicate were sporadic at best, with both sides retreating into their own emotional silos. The gulf between them felt wider than ever, and Emma found herself sinking into a quiet despair. One afternoon, as Emma sat on the porch of their home, staring out at the vast, snowy landscape, Madeline arrived for one of her regular visits. She stepped up to the porch, her boots crunching on the snow, and sat beside Emma, offering a tentative smile. "You've been quiet," Madeline said after a long pause, her voice gentle. "How are you holding up?" Emma didn't look at her at first. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavily on her shoulders, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she wanted to speak. But then, the dam inside her broke. "I'm so tired, Mom," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "I've tried everything. I've tried to be the wife he needs, the woman I thought he wanted, but it feels like I'm just losing him a little more every day. I don't know what happened." Madeline watched her closely. It pained her to see Emma so defeated, but there was a part of her that could understand the frustration, perhaps even recognize a bit of herself in the younger woman. She knew what it was like to be at the mercy of a marriage that felt like it was slipping through your fingers. "I know it's hard," Madeline said, her tone steady. "Marriage is never easy, especially when both people are trying to find their way together. But you have to remember, Emma, it's about more than just making him happy. It's about you too. You have to find your own strength in this. Don't lose yourself." Emma turned to face her, her eyes wide with surprise. "But I don't know how anymore. I feel like everything I do only pushes him further away." Madeline took a deep breath, her gaze softening. "You can't control him, Emma. But you can control how you react. And if you give up on yourself in the process, it'll only make it worse." For a moment, there was silence between them, filled only by the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. Then Emma spoke again, this time her voice tinged with a sense of clarity. Maybe I need to stop trying to fix everything. Maybe I need to let Mark see me for who I am without trying to be perfect." Madeline smiled warmly. "That's a good place to start." Underscore 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 underscore. Part 6. The Breaking Point. The tension in the house finally reached its breaking point one evening. Mark came home after another long day at work, his face etched with exhaustion. Emma was sitting in the living room, her arms crossed, her eyes red from crying. "We need to talk," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated, looking at her with a mix of frustration and guilt. "I don't know if I'm ready for this conversation." "You have to be," Emma replied, her voice firm despite the tears still in her eyes. "I can't keep doing this, Mark. We can't keep living like this." Mark stood still for a long moment, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of her words, and he knew that if he didn't say something, if they didn't finally confront the heart of their problems, they might lose each other forever. "Emma," Mark began, but his words faltered. He didn't know how to make it right. How could he fix something when he didn't even know where to start? Emma looked at him, her heart aching. "You don't have to fix it, Mark. You just need to be here. With me. Like you used to be." The silence that followed was thick with emotion, an unspoken truth they both had to face. And with that, a quiet, painful reconciliation began. It wasn't an easy fix, but both Mark and Emma knew that if they wanted to save their marriage, they would have to let go of the perfection they had been trying to uphold. It would take time, patience, and understanding, but they had the will to try. Underscore 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 underscore. Part 7, A New Beginning. In the weeks that followed, things began to slowly shift. Mark and Emma had their first real, honest conversation in months. They laid bare their fears, their insecurities, and the love they still had for one another. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. Madeline watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with hope. She knew that both Mark and Emma were finally on the path to understanding, and perhaps, most importantly, they were learning to communicate. Though the journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, there was a quiet peace settling in the family. For the first time in a long while, Madeline felt hopeful. Not just for her son and his wife, but for herself too. It was clear now that healing wasn't just about fixing broken things, it was about learning to accept the flaws, the imperfections, and the quiet moments of understanding. Part 8. The Weight of the Past. The weeks following their first heartfelt conversation were a slow, steady march toward healing for Mark and Emma. Every day, they took one small step forward, and though the distance between them felt like an abyss at times, there was always something quietly bridging that gap, an understanding. A hand reached out when neither one knew what to say. However, the unspoken weight of their past remained in the background, an invisible force they both had to reckon with. For Emma, it was the constant feeling of inadequacy that gnawed at her. She loved Mark deeply, but the doubts she'd carried since their wedding day, about her place in this family, about her ability to meet their expectations, remained firmly planted in her mind. For Mark, the issue was guilt. He had seen how his mother's world revolved around him, and now he was torn between the love for his wife, who had grown up in a very different environment, and his mother's expectations. The conflict had always been there, buried beneath the surface, but it had never been so stark until now. One afternoon, while Emma was at work, Madeline stopped by their home. It was a quiet day, the kind of day where the winter wind whispered through the trees and the world seemed still. Mark was home, sitting at the kitchen table, his face drawn and thoughtful. He had barely slept the night before, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. "Hi, Mark," Madeline said, stepping into the kitchen. She offered him a gentle smile, though her eyes were full of concern. "Hi, Mom," Mark replied, his voice rough. "What brings you here?" Madeline paused, choosing her words carefully. "I thought I'd come by and check in. I know things have been hard lately, between you and Emma." Mark ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. "I just don't know, Mom. It feels like I'm failing both of you. I want to be the husband she deserves, but I also don't want to hurt you." Madeline's heart ached. She could see her son's turmoil, the impossible position he had placed himself in. He had always been the type to carry the weight of others' emotions on his shoulders, but this time, he couldn't fix everything. "You're not failing anyone," Madeline said softly, her voice full of understanding. "But, Mark, you need to make a choice. You can't keep walking this tightrope between Emma and me. You have to decide who you are in this. Do you want to be a good husband? A good son? Or both?" Mark's eyes flickered with pain. "I don't know how to do both, Mom. I don't know how to make everyone happy." Madeline sat down across from him, her gaze steady. "You're not supposed to make everyone happy, Mark. That's not your responsibility. What matters is that you're true to yourself, true to the people who love you. And sometimes that means being honest, even when it's hard." Mark looked up at her, and for the first time in a long while, he saw her not as his mother, but as a woman who had lived through her own struggles. Her wisdom wasn't just born from age, it was born from a lifetime of understanding what it meant to love and sacrifice. "Maybe I've been too focused on keeping the peace," Mark admitted quietly. Maybe I need to be more honest with Emma. I've been avoiding her too much. Madeline nodded. It's never easy, but it's the only way forward. And remember, Mark, honesty doesn't mean being cruel. It means being open, even when you're afraid. Mark sat in silence for a moment, absorbing his mother's words. He could feel a shift within himself, a determination starting to form. He had always been afraid of confrontation, but now he realized that avoiding it had caused more damage than facing it ever could. Underscore 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 underscore. Part 9. The Final Confrontation. Later that evening, as the first snowflakes began to fall outside, Mark and Emma found themselves alone in the living room, the air between them still thick with unspoken words. Mark had decided to take the plunge. He had to be honest, no matter how difficult. Emma, Mark began, his voice hesitant but firm. I need to talk to you. Emma looked up from the book she had been reading, her expression guarded. She had been waiting for this conversation, though she hadn't known how to start it herself. About what, she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and a hint of fear. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. About us. About everything that's been going on. I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I've been avoiding you, and I know it's hurtful. But the truth is, I've been scared. Emma's heart tightened in her chest, but she didn't interrupt. She waited, hoping that this time they would finally speak the truth. I've been scared of losing you, Mark continued, his voice raw. But I've also been scared of losing my relationship with my mom. I know that sounds ridiculous, but the pressure, it's been overwhelming. I didn't know how to balance the two. I felt like I was failing both of you. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she listened to him, the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. Mark, I never wanted to take you away from your family. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. Like I wasn't always competing for your attention. I know, Mark said, his voice filled with regret. I was never fair to you, Emma. I should have been there for you. I should have fought for us instead of running away. I've been so focused on trying to make everyone happy that I forgot about what really matters. Emma reached for his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. And what really matters? You and me, Mark replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. Our marriage. Our happiness. I'm sorry, Emma. I promise I'll do better. I want to fight for us, for our future. The words, simple as they were, hung in the air like a promise they both desperately needed to hear. Underscore 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 underscore. Part 10. A New Understanding. In the days that followed, things slowly began to change. Mark and Emma, though not yet free of their struggles, started to rebuild their relationship. They communicated more openly, and for the first time in a long while, they began to rediscover the bond that had once brought them together. Madeline watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with relief and pride. She had done her part not by fixing their problems, but by allowing them the space to find their own way. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the snowy landscape, Emma stopped by for a visit. The tension between them had softened over the past weeks, and Emma now looked at her mother-in-law with a newfound sense of respect. "Hi, Madeline," Emma said, her voice warm and genuine. "I wanted to thank you." Madeline raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. Thank me for what, dear? For being there, Emma said softly, sitting down beside her. For helping me see things from a different perspective. I didn't know how much I needed to hear your advice until I did. Madeline smiled gently. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is listen. But I'm glad you're both finding your way. Emma nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength. We're not perfect, but we're getting there. And I'm starting to believe that maybe that's enough. Madeline's heart swelled with pride. It's more than enough, Emma. Part 11. Old Wounds, New Beginnings. The months that followed the deep conversations and confessions were a time of reflection and rebuilding. Mark and Emma's relationship had slowly, but surely, started to heal. Their late-night conversations were less about unresolved anger and more about shared vulnerability. Emma had learned that Mark wasn't her enemy, nor was he the perfect husband she had once expected him to be. Mark had come to terms with the fact that he wasn't perfect either, and that both he and Emma would have to carry the weight of their marriage together. Yet, the shadow of their past still lingered. For Emma, it was the weight of expectations she had tried so hard to live up to, both her own and her mother-in-law's. For Mark, it was the emotional divide between his wife and mother that had left him torn for so long. Even now, he found himself walking a tightrope, trying not to upset either woman. One rainy afternoon, as Madeline walked through the door, she could sense the change in the atmosphere. Mark was there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of him. His tired eyes were softened by the quiet peace that had begun to settle over their home. But there was still a subtle tension that Madeline couldn't ignore. "Hello, my boy," Madeline said, greeting him with a smile as she walked in. Mark looked up, his expression neutral but warmer than before. "Hi, Mom. How's everything?" Madeline set her bag down on the counter. She could see the faintest hint of stress in Mark's face, despite his attempts to appear calm. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Is everything okay with you too? I've noticed you've both been quieter than usual." Mark sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I guess I've been thinking a lot about everything. Emma and I are better, but there's still this feeling like I'm stuck between two worlds. I don't want to hurt anyone, but sometimes I don't know where I stand." Madeline nodded, understanding all too well the complexity of his position. It's not easy being caught in the middle. But Mark, you have to realize something. You're not responsible for everyone's happiness. You never were. And you can't keep sacrificing yourself to avoid upsetting others. That's no way to live. Mark looked down at his coffee, taking in his mother's words. "I know. I've just been trying to do what's right. But it's like I'm always trying to fix things that aren't broken." Madeline walked over to him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is give people the space to fix things themselves. You've done the best you could, Mark. Now it's time for you to live for yourself, too." Mark met her eyes, a flicker of realization lighting his face. "You're right, Mom. I've been carrying too much, trying to make everyone happy. But I can't lose myself in the process." "I won't." Part 12. A Tipping Point. The following weeks were a time of small victories and occasional setbacks. Emma, though she had begun to feel the weight of her own emotional healing, still found it difficult to fully let go of the insecurities she had developed over the years. The pressure to be the perfect wife, to be everything Mark needed her to be, still loomed over her, sometimes stifling her sense of self. One night, after a long day, Mark and Emma sat in their living room, the atmosphere thick with the weight of unspoken words. Emma was quiet, lost in thought as she stared out the window, watching the snowflakes dance in the cold night air. Mark noticed the distance between them, and though he had made efforts to rebuild their connection, he still felt like he was grasping at something elusive. He put his coffee cup down, looking at Emma with the kind of soft concern he hadn't shown in months. "Emma," Mark started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to ask you something. Have you been feeling okay? I know we've talked about a lot, but I don't want you to bottle things up." Emma took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the window. "I don't know, Mark. I feel like I've been putting on a brave face for so long, but inside, I don't feel like I'm the woman I used to be. I've changed, and I don't know if I like the person I've become." Mark frowned, his heart aching for her. "What do you mean? You're still the woman I married." "Nothing's changed, Emma. You're still you." Emma shook her head. "I don't feel like me anymore. I've been trying so hard to meet your expectations, and my mom's and everyone else's. But I've lost sight of who I am." Mark's gaze softened as he reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "Emma, you don't need to be anyone other than yourself. You never have. I married you for who you are, not who you think you should be." Emma turned to face him, her eyes wide with emotion. "But I'm scared, Mark. Scared that if I stop trying so hard, I'll lose you. That I'll lose everything I've fought so hard to hold on to." Mark squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "You won't lose me. I promise. You've never had to fight for me. You just need to fight for yourself, for the woman you are, not the one you think you should be." The weight of his words sank in, and Emma allowed herself to finally let go, the tears flowing freely as she released all the fear and insecurity she had been holding onto for so long. Mark pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, the tears mixing with the quiet resolution of the moment. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. Part 13. Rebuilding Trust. As the weeks passed, Mark and Emma continued to navigate the delicate balance of their marriage. They learned to communicate more openly, without fear of rejection or judgment. They began rebuilding not just their relationship with each other, but also their individual sense of self. Madeline, though still a silent observer, could see the changes in both of them. Emma had become more confident in her own skin, learning to speak her mind and voice her concerns. Mark had grown more self-assured, no longer afraid to stand up for what he needed and wanted in his marriage. One evening, as Madeline sat at the dining table with them, watching the two of them laugh over dinner, a quiet peace settled over her heart. The distance between the three of them had shrunk in ways she never thought possible. The old wounds had begun to heal, and the new beginnings they had all worked toward were finally becoming a reality. She looked at them both and smiled softly, her eyes brimming with quiet pride. Part 14. A Future Unwritten. The family had reached a new phase, one marked by understanding, forgiveness, and growth. Though the future was never certain, they now had the tools to face it together. Mark and Emma's marriage was no longer a fragile thing, held together by forced smiles and silent suffering. It was real, imperfect, but solid, a union built on mutual respect and love. As for Madeline, she had found peace not only in her relationship with her son and daughter-in-law, but also in herself. She had learned to let go, to trust that Mark and Emma could find their way. She was no longer just a mother trying to hold everything together. She was a woman who had seen her family through the storm and now watched as they thrived. Part 15. External Pressures. Months passed, and the Leclerc family had found a rhythm, a quiet peace settling over their once tense home. Mark and Emma were happier, more connected than they had been in the years prior. Their newfound honesty and understanding had become the foundation of their relationship, but life, as it often does, threw new challenges their way. Mark had been offered a new opportunity at work, one that could take him to Toronto for an extended period. It was the kind of career advancement he had dreamed of for years, a chance to break free of the confines of the small town that had shaped his life. But with this new opportunity came a dilemma. Would he have to choose between his career and his family? The prospect of being away for months weighed heavily on him. Emma, too, felt the pressure. Though their marriage had grown stronger, she had yet to find the perfect balance between her role as a wife and her own sense of identity. She had been focusing on herself more in recent months, attending therapy and rediscovering the parts of herself she had lost. But the prospect of Mark leaving for months at a time sent a ripple of fear through her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of distance, even though she knew it was a crucial step for Mark's career. One evening, as Mark and Emma sat together on the couch, a quiet tension hung between them. Emma could sense that something was weighing on Mark, and she knew what it was before he even spoke. "Emma," Mark started, his voice hesitant. "I got the offer." Emma turned to face him, her heart sinking. "The job in Toronto?" Mark nodded. "It's everything I've worked for. But I don't know how to make this work. It would mean being away from you for months at a time." Emma's mind raced. The thought of Mark being so far away for an extended period was terrifying. They had worked so hard to rebuild their bond, and the idea of putting distance between them felt like a step backward. Yet, she also knew that this was an opportunity Mark couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I want you to take it, Mark." "I do. I know how much this means to you." Mark looked at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt. But, "I'm scared," Emma admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of losing you again, scared of the distance growing between us." Mark reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "You won't lose me. Not now, not ever. We've come too far for that." Emma nodded, though the fear still lingered in her heart. "I know. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to handle that kind of distance." Mark's expression softened. "We've both worked so hard to rebuild what we have. I don't want to risk it either, but I think we need to trust that we can make it through anything. This isn't just about me and my career, Emma. It's about us and how we can continue to grow together." There was a long silence as Emma processed his words. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll support you. We'll figure it out." Mark pulled her into an embrace, his heart swelling with gratitude. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had learned that nothing worth having ever was. They would navigate this challenge together, just as they had everything else. Part 16, A Mother's Concern. Madeline watched as her son and daughter-in-law faced the prospect of this new chapter. She had always believed in Mark's potential, but seeing him face this crossroads brought her own fears to the surface. She knew how much he had struggled in the past with balancing his relationship with Emma and his responsibilities to his career. Now, with the distance of Toronto looming, she couldn't help but worry. One afternoon, Madeline found herself sitting alone in the living room, her thoughts consumed by the changes. She hadn't said much to Mark or Emma about the job offer, but the weight of it was pressing on her heart. She couldn't help but think back to when Mark had first left for school all those years ago. It had been a painful separation for her, one that had caused an ache in her chest every time she thought about it. She wanted to believe that Mark and Emma's relationship had grown strong enough to weather the storm, but the truth was, she had seen so many families torn apart by distance. The thought of her son being so far away, unsure of how his marriage would fare, made her feel a deep, maternal worry. When Mark arrived at her house later that afternoon, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "are you sure about this?" Mark looked at his mother, startled by her concern. "What do you mean, Mom?" Madeline stood up, pacing slightly. "I know this job is important, but I worry about you too. I've seen how hard you and Emma have worked to get to this place, and I'm afraid that this distance will undo everything." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've thought about it too, Mom. I know it's not going to be easy, but I can't just pass up an opportunity like this. I want to be able to provide for Emma, for both of us. I know this is a risk, but sometimes you have to take risks." Madeline stepped toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "I know you do, Mark. But at what cost? Sometimes the things we think we want, things we think we need, don't always lead to the happiness we expect." Mark took a deep breath. "I don't want to lose her, Mom. I don't want this job to come between us." Madeline softened, her hands reaching out to rest on Mark's shoulders. "I know you don't. and I know you'll do everything you can to make it work. But just remember, sometimes what you think is best isn't always what's best for the heart. You need to take care of each other no matter what." Mark nodded, grateful for his mother's wisdom, but still uncertain of the future. "I'll be careful, Mom. I promise." Part 17. A Test of Trust. Weeks passed, and Mark prepared for the move to Toronto. The tension in the house was palpable, but so was the love they shared. Emma, though afraid, supported Mark's decision. She knew this was a chance for him, one he couldn't turn down. And yet, there was still a fear inside her, a fear that, despite all they had worked through, they were being tested in ways they had never anticipated. The night before Mark was scheduled to leave, the three of them sat together in the living room, an air of bittersweetness hanging in the room. Madeline was there, offering quiet support, though her concern was written all over her face. "I don't want you to go," Emma said softly, her voice full of emotion. Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I don't want to leave either, Emma, but I need to do this for us, for our future." Emma nodded, wiping away a tear. "I know. I just want to make sure we're okay. That we'll be okay." "We will be," Mark said, his voice steady, though his own uncertainty bubbled beneath the surface. "We've been through so much, and this is just another challenge. We'll get through it together." Madeline sat quietly, watching them. She had always been the one to give advice, to provide comfort, but now she realized that her role had changed. She was no longer just Mark's mother, offering him wisdom. She was a part of the larger picture. She had to trust in the bond they had rebuilt, just as Mark and Emma were learning to trust each other. "Remember," Madeline said softly, "distance is just physical. It doesn't have to mean emotional separation. You've both come so far. Keep holding on to each other, and don't let fear take over." Mark and Emma looked at each other, their hands intertwined. In that moment, they both knew that no matter how far apart they were, they would always carry the strength of their love with them. Part 18. The first day apart. The day came for Mark to leave. The goodbyes were tearful, but there was an underlying sense of determination. They had worked too hard to let go of each other now. As Mark drove away from their home, Emma stood on the porch, watching him go. A single tear fell down her cheek, but she knew, deep down, that this was just another chapter in their story. A chapter they would navigate with the same strength, honesty, and love that had brought them to this point. And as Madeline stood beside her, watching her son drive off into the horizon, she, too, felt a mix of pride and apprehension. But she also knew that sometimes love was about learning to let go, even when it hurt. Part 19. The distance between us. The first few days after Mark left were harder than Emma had anticipated. The house felt emptier, quieter. The space Mark once filled with his presence, his laughter, and his quiet comfort now felt like a hollow echo. Emma tried to maintain her daily routine, work, therapy sessions, time with friends, but nothing seemed to fill the void. She often found herself staring at her phone, hoping for a message or a call, but each time her screen remained empty. It wasn't that Mark didn't try to reach out. They spoke every day, sometimes twice a day, but it was never the same. The distance between them felt real in every sense of the word. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through photos of their happier times together, Emma felt the familiar sting of loneliness creep in. She missed Mark. But more than that, she missed the closeness they had once shared, the easy conversations, the physical comfort of simply being near each other. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mark, and for a moment, her heart lifted. But as she read his words, her excitement faded. "Mark, hey, just checking in. I've been busy all day, but I miss you. How's everything going?" Emma paused before replying, wondering whether she should share her feelings. She didn't want to burden him with her loneliness when he had his own challenges in Toronto. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest. After a long pause, she typed a response. Emma, I miss you too. It's harder than I thought. I've been keeping busy, but it's just not the same without you here. The message sat on the screen for several minutes before Mark replied. Mark, I miss you more than I can say, Emma. It's tough here too, but we'll get through this. I believe in us. Emma smiled slightly, but it didn't stop the tears that welled up in her eyes. She knew Mark was struggling as much as she was, but it didn't make it any easier. The uncertainty of when they would be reunited, how they would navigate this distance, was a constant source of stress. Part 20. The Quiet Strength of Madeline. While Emma was grappling with the distance, Madeline had found herself in a new position as well. For years, her life had been about taking care of Mark, guiding him, offering her wisdom, and being a steady presence. But with Mark gone, she was beginning to realize just how much her relationship with him had been rooted in their physical proximity. Now, as she tried to support him from afar, she understood Emma's struggle in a way she hadn't before. Madeline saw her son's new reality, felt the weight of it in his calls and messages, and knew that this new chapter would challenge him. She also saw the strain on Emma, the silent sadness that lingered around her like a fog. Madeline was aware that her role had shifted. She couldn't just be Mark's mother anymore. She had to be there for both of them, supporting Emma as much as she had supported her son. After all, it was the bond between Emma and Mark that mattered most, and if she could help nurture that, she would. One evening, after a particularly hard phone call with Mark, where he sounded weary and frustrated, Madeline decided to check in on Emma. She called, her tone light but concerned. Hello. Emma's voice was soft, and Madeline could sense the heaviness behind it. Hi, dear. How are you holding up? Madeline asked gently, her voice full of warmth. Emma smiled slightly, even though her eyes were tired. I'm okay. It's just harder than I thought it would be. Madeline nodded. I know, sweetheart. I can imagine how tough this must be on both of you. But, you're not alone in this. You have Mark, even if he's far away. And you have me. We'll get through it together. Emma let out a shaky breath. I know, but there are moments when I feel so disconnected from him. Like we're not the same anymore. We've worked so hard to build this relationship, and now it feels like I'm losing a part of it. Madeline felt her heart ache for Emma. Emma, relationships are always changing. It's not always easy, especially when distance is involved. But I've seen you too. I've seen how you support each other, how you fight for each other. And that's what matters. This is just a test. And I have no doubt that you'll both come out of this stronger. Emma sniffled softly. I hope so. I really do. I know so, Madeline replied firmly. Trust in that. Part 21. Growing Pains. As the weeks passed, Mark and Emma continued to adjust to their new reality. They spoke every day, sometimes more than once, but it was never the same as being in the same room. The conversations began to feel more like routine than genuine connection, and both Mark and Emma began to feel the strain of maintaining their bond through technology alone. Mark's new job consumed most of his time, and his work schedule in Toronto was intense. He often found himself working late into the night, and when he did have free time, he was too exhausted to engage deeply with Emma. Emma, too, struggled to fill the silence. The small town where she lived felt even quieter without Mark there, and she found herself reaching out to friends more than she ever had, but it didn't replace the intimacy she shared with her husband. One evening, as Emma sat on the couch, flipping through a photo album, she received a call from Mark. Her heart lifted at the sound of his voice. Hey, Emma, Mark greeted her, his voice warm, though slightly strained. How's everything going? It's been okay, Emma replied, trying to sound upbeat. I miss you. It's not the same here without you. I miss you too, Mark said quietly. I've been working so much, it feels like I barely have time to breathe. But I'm trying. I'm trying to make this work for both of us. I know, Emma said, her heart swelling with love for him. Sometimes it feels like we're fading. Like we're losing that closeness we had. Mark paused on the other end of the line. Emma, I don't want that. I want us. But I also know this is temporary. I'm doing everything I can to make this work. And when I come back, I promise we'll pick up right where we left off. I hope so, Emma said softly. I really do. Trust me, we'll make it through this. Together. Just hold on. Emma took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They both knew the road ahead would not be easy, but they also knew that they couldn't give up. They had come too far, fought too hard for their love. Part 22. A Mother's Wisdom. Back in Quebec, Madeline found herself reflecting on her own past. She had faced difficult decisions in her marriage and had once been torn between her role as a wife, a mother, and a woman with her own needs. It wasn't easy to let go of her son, to trust that he could navigate his marriage without her constant presence. But she had learned over the years that sometimes the greatest gift a parent could give their child was the space to grow on their own. She called Mark one evening, sensing that he was once again struggling with his feelings of guilt. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm managing," Mark replied. "It's just harder than I thought it would be. I feel like I'm letting Emma down even though I know this is the right thing for my career." "Mark," Madeline said, her voice firm but loving, "it's natural to feel that way. But you have to trust in the foundation you've built with Emma. You've both worked so hard to get where you are. This distance is temporary, but what you have is real. Don't let guilt or fear take that from you." Mark was silent for a moment, taking in his mother's words. "Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that." "I know you did," Madeline said softly. "And remember, you can't do everything alone. You have Emma. You have me. And we're all here for you, no matter how far apart we are." Part 23. Strength Through Adversity. As time passed, both Mark and Emma continued to adapt to their new lives apart. The distance between them remained, but they found new ways to stay connected. They planned visits whenever possible and scheduled regular calls, making the effort to talk about their day-to-day lives, their dreams, and their struggles. Slowly but surely, they rebuilt the intimacy they had once taken for granted. Madeline, too, found peace in knowing that her son and daughter-in-law were learning to navigate this challenge together. She remained a steady presence in their lives, offering her wisdom when needed, but also giving them the space to grow as individuals and as a couple. And in the end, as Mark and Emma prepared for his eventual return, they both knew that they had learned something invaluable during their time apart. Their love was not just about being together in the same place, it was about being able to endure and grow, even when distance separated them. Part 24. The Return Home. Months had passed since Mark left for Toronto, and Emma was beginning to adjust to the rhythm of life without him. Though she had found her own strength, taking up new hobbies and spending time with friends, there was still an emptiness she couldn't ignore. There were days when the silence in the house felt overwhelming, when she longed for Mark's touch, his voice, his presence. But with each passing day, she had become more resilient. She had started working on herself more, attending therapy, focusing on her own well-being, and even taking up painting, something she had always wanted to try but never had the time for. The distance, though painful, had taught her to rediscover who she was outside of her role as a wife. She had learned that self-care was not a luxury but a necessity. Still, there were moments of doubt. Emma had seen how Mark had immersed himself in his career in Toronto, how he seemed to be doing well, despite the occasional late-night call or brief texts that hinted at his own exhaustion. It was easy to wonder whether the distance was changing things between them more than they cared to admit. Then, one day, a text appeared on her phone. "Mark, I'm coming home tomorrow. Can't wait to see you." The message made Emma's heart skip a beat. It was a mix of excitement and nervousness. The last few months had been a test of their relationship, and though they had managed to hold on to each other, This would be their first real test of whether their connection had survived the separation. That night, Emma stayed up late preparing for his return. She cleaned the house, laid out his favorite foods, and even dressed in something she knew he would love. She wanted everything to feel just right. The next day, as the sun set and the familiar sound of Mark's car pulling into the driveway reached her ears, Emma felt her heart race. She stepped outside to greet him, and there he was, standing in the doorway, looking slightly weary but smiling widely. "Mark!" Emma exclaimed, her voice breaking slightly as she ran to embrace him. Mark wrapped her in his arms, holding her tightly. "I've missed you so much," he whispered into her hair. "I've missed you too," Emma replied, pulling back to look at him. "It feels like you've been gone forever." "It's only been a few months, but it's felt like a lifetime," Mark admitted, his voice soft with emotion. "I didn't realize how much I'd miss you." For a few moments, they simply stood there, holding each other, taking in the reality of what had once felt like an impossible distance between them. But now, standing together again, it felt as if they had grown stronger, more aware of each other's needs and desires. Part 25. Reconnecting. The first few days after Mark's return were filled with long conversations and quiet moments. Emma had missed the small things, the way Mark would make her laugh, the simple joy of sitting together in silence, reading or cooking dinner. And Mark had missed the warmth of home, the familiarity of their shared space, the comfort of Emma's presence. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Mark reached for Emma's hand, his thumb brushing over her skin as he studied her face. "I know it's been tough, Emma," Mark said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I can't pretend that I wasn't afraid this time apart would change things between us. But I've realized something. Distance doesn't just test us, it strengthens us too. I've missed you, and I've missed us. But I also see that you've become stronger while I've been away. You've grown, and so have I." Emma looked at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I've had to, Mark. I've had to learn to stand on my own more. But I've realized something too. Our relationship isn't just about being together physically. It's about how we connect, how we support each other, even when we're apart." Mark nodded, his eyes soft. "Exactly. I've learned that my career, no matter how important it is, can never replace what we have. I was so focused on that opportunity that I forgot the most important thing. You and me. We're in this together. And nothing, no job, no distance, will ever change that." Emma leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I've missed you more than I realized. But I think the time apart gave me a clearer sense of who I am. I didn't want to lose myself in our relationship, and I didn't. I think we both needed that time to figure out who we are, individually and as a couple." Mark kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You've been so strong. And I've learned that being apart doesn't mean we're not together. We're just taking on different challenges, but we'll always face them side by side." Part 26. A new chapter. As the weeks passed, Mark and Emma fell back into their routine, but it was a new routine, one born of mutual respect, understanding, and a deeper connection. The challenges they had faced while apart had only solidified their bond, and though they knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, they felt more prepared than ever to face whatever came their way. Madeline, too, noticed the change in her son. When Mark came by to visit her one afternoon, she could see that there was a newfound calm about him. He was still the same Mark, ambitious, driven, and caring, but there was a quiet certainty in his demeanor, a sense of peace he hadn't had before. "How are you doing, Mark?" Madeline asked, her voice warm as she made tea. "I'm good, Mom," Mark replied, a small smile on his face. "Really good. I've learned a lot these past few months. Not just about my career, but about Emma and about myself." Madeline studied him for a moment, her eyes full of wisdom. "I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes it takes stepping away from something to see it more clearly. And I can see that you and Emma have grown, individually and together." Mark nodded. "Yeah, It's not always been easy, but I think that's what makes it real. We faced our fears, and now we're stronger for it. And, Mom, I've learned that no matter where I go, Emma is my home. She always has been. Madeline smiled softly. I'm proud of you, Mark. And I'm proud of both of you. It's not always the distance that tests a relationship, it's the way we choose to respond to it. You and Emma have chosen to fight for each other, and that's something truly special. Part 27. Moving forward together. Mark and Emma continued to navigate life with new understanding and appreciation for one another. They had grown through their challenges, and while the future was uncertain in many ways, they knew they were stronger together. With Mark's career in Toronto settling into a more manageable rhythm, he and Emma had found a balance between his work and their relationship. They had learned to communicate better, to express their needs, and to give each other the space to grow without feeling threatened. One afternoon, after a quiet walk in the park, Mark stopped and turned to Emma, taking her hand in his. I know it hasn't been easy, and we've faced a lot of challenges. But I'm excited for what's next for us. Emma smiled up at him, her heart full of love. Me too. I know we've got a lot ahead of us, but I know we can handle it. Together. Mark kissed her gently, his voice low. Always together. And with that, the future stretched out before them, not without its uncertainties, but filled with the promise of growth, understanding, and love that had been tested, but never broken. Part 28. The Unexpected Visitor. A year had passed since Mark and Emma had successfully navigated the distance between them, and life had settled into a relatively peaceful routine. Mark had found a balance between work and family life, and Emma, though still occasionally stressed by her responsibilities, had grown much stronger. Their connection felt solid, though not without its usual ebbs and flows. One evening, as Emma was preparing dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from Madeline, her mother-in-law. Madeline? Emma, can you call me for a moment? There's something I think you should know. A sense of unease gripped Emma as she quickly typed a response. Emma, sure, Mom. I'll call you right now. After a few rings, Madeline's voice came through the line, calm but serious. Emma, there's something I need to tell you. Mark might have an opportunity to transfer to Toronto long-term, and we need to think about what this means for the future. Emma paused, feeling a knot form in her stomach. Though she knew that Mark's career was important to him, the idea of him being away again, permanently, felt like a step backward after everything they had worked through. Is this something Mark has already decided? Emma asked, her voice carefully controlled. Madeline's tone softened. No, not yet. He hasn't made a final decision. But I thought you should know it's a big opportunity, and I know it will affect everything. Emma sighed, feeling a mix of concern and uncertainty. I understand. Thank you for telling me, Mom. I'll talk to him about it. After hanging up, Emma found herself staring at her phone, her thoughts racing. Was this the next big challenge they would face, or was it a turning point for their family? How would Mark's decision affect their relationship? Part 29. Difficult Conversations. The next evening, Emma decided she needed to talk to Mark about the offer. They had already been through so much together, but this felt like a crossroads. As Mark walked in after a long day at work, Emma was waiting for him in the living room. Hey, what's up? Mark asked, setting his briefcase down. He noticed the tension in her eyes, the seriousness of her expression. Mark, Emma began, her voice calm but firm. Your mom called me today. She told me about the opportunity in Toronto. Is this something you're seriously considering? Mark froze for a moment, unsure of how to answer. He had been keeping his thoughts on the matter to himself, unsure of how Emma would react. It's a big opportunity for me, Emma. You know how much I've been working for something like this. It's a step forward in my career, and it could be really good for us, in the long term. Emma felt a tightness in her chest as she heard his words. I get that, Mark. But we've been through a lot. We've rebuilt everything after being apart, and now you're telling me you might move again. Mark looked down, guilt creeping into his features. I'm not saying I'm going to do it yet, but it's hard to turn something like this down. I don't know what else to do. Emma felt the sting of his words. They had fought so hard to be together, to make their relationship work. Was it fair to ask her to live through another long-distance period? But she also knew that Mark's career mattered to him, and he had worked tirelessly for this opportunity. I understand it's important to you, Emma said, her voice quieter now. But I need to know, where do I fit into this decision? Do you think about us, about what it would mean for our relationship? Mark's expression softened as he walked over to her, taking her hand in his. Of course I do. But it's hard, Emma. I want to give you everything, but I also want to succeed. I don't know how to do both without making sacrifices. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I need you to be honest with me, Mark. If you decide to take this job, can we make it work? Can you really be present for me, for us, if you're so far away again? Mark paused, looking into her eyes. I don't want to lose you, Emma. I don't want to make a choice between you and my career. But this opportunity, it's everything I've worked for. Emma looked down at their hands, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. I want to support you, Mark, I really do. But I need to know that you're making this decision with us in mind, not just your career. There was a long silence between them as Mark processed her words. He knew Emma was right. This decision wasn't just about his job, it was about their future together. Part 30. The mother-in-law's support. While Mark and Emma struggled to figure out their next steps, Madeline continued to quietly watch from the sidelines. She knew this was a pivotal moment for both of them. Mark had always been driven by ambition, but he had also always struggled with finding a balance between his career and his relationships. One afternoon, after Emma had sent Mark off to think things over, Madeline invited her to tea at her house. Emma, I know things are difficult right now, Madeline began, once they were seated. I've seen Mark wrestle with these kinds of decisions before. But what you need to understand is this. Relationships are never about just one person's success. It's about compromise, and it's about supporting each other, even when the road is tough. Emma sighed, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her teacup. I know. But how do I support him without losing myself? It feels like we're always one step away from breaking again. Madeline reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Emma's. You won't lose yourself, Emma. You've come so far already. And I know Mark doesn't want to make you feel like an afterthought. But this is about him learning how to be the man you need him to be, just as much as it is about him learning to be the man he wants to be for himself. Emma nodded slowly, taking in Madeline's words. She had always found comfort in her mother-in-law's wisdom, even when it was hard to accept. Thank you, Mom, Emma said softly. I just don't know what to do. But I know I have to make sure I'm not losing my way again. I need to know Mark will fight for us, just like I am. Madeline smiled warmly. He will, dear. He just needs to understand that you're not the only one making sacrifices. Part 31. Making the decision. The following days were filled with deep reflection for Mark. He spent long hours at work, trying to focus on his responsibilities, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Emma. They had fought so hard to build their relationship, and the thought of losing that over a career decision was tearing him apart. One evening, Mark returned home to find Emma waiting for him, her face calm but resolute. Have you made a decision? She asked gently. Mark looked at her, his heart heavy. I have, Emma. I've thought about it nonstop. And as much as this job means to me, I can't ignore what matters most. And that's you. Our future. I can't keep making decisions based on what I think I need to succeed. I need to start thinking about what we need. Emma's eyes softened as she took a step closer. Mark. I'm going to turn down the job, Mark said, his voice firm. It's not easy, and it's not the decision I thought I'd make, but I can't risk losing you again. We've already been through so much. Emma's heart swelled with relief and love. She reached for him, pulling him into a tight embrace. Thank you, she whispered. I know it wasn't an easy decision. But we're in this together. Always.